Hi guys, welcome back to K-Pop Astrology by yours truly, Christina Ray. So, if you're new here, my name is Christina Ray, one third of the Fangirls React channel, and this is my little segment, my little corner of astrology here in this channel where I break down K-pop groups, K-pop idols, K-pop comebacks, and just break it down really through the astrological lens. And if you're new here as well, I practice Hellenistic astrology with a little bit of modern astrology into it. I kind of like to mix both, but I am a practitioner of the Hellenistic version of astrology. So, a lot of the approach that I take with my readings comes from the Hellenistic practice. So just FYI, if you are a fellow astrologer, just know where I'm coming from. Um, Now, if you're here for Felix, right? You already know Felix. And even though we don't have a birth time for him, I kind of wanted to approach this chart breakdown. Um, because one of the things that obviously we're all noticing is how he is like completely unavoidable at this point. Um, but not in a bad way. It's just a very specific way. So it's not like he like went viral overnight and stuff like that. Though we know of the Felix effect, but again, it's not like it's gradually, right? That happens with like every comeback and whatnot. But for some reason, like the industry like decided to just quietly be like, oh, this is the guy. This is someone that we are comfortable putting forward everywhere, right? So whether that's in fashion and like tech adjacent collaborations or platforms, or even global brands, I kind of wanted to approach this chart from that interest, is what I want to say. Like, why? Why is this happening? Because again, when somebody starts to become like the face of everything, this consistent, there has to be something in there that can point us a pattern that can point us to why this is happening, right? So obviously, like I said, we don't have a confirmed time for his chart. But if you know, you know, that's the way that I work. I really like to get in there and like do my research and rectify in a way that could kind of give me a better, clearer picture of what we are working with for a chart. Um, and I kind of did that with Lino. I'll kind of link it somewhere above. Where I kind of worked backwards, right? I'm taking like important dates, important brand deal dates, announcements, and stuff like that to kind of see if it lines up, right? Or what's lining up to what rising sign. And so just because I kind of wanted to have a better understanding, right? I don't want to slap on a rising sign to slap on a rising sign. Oh, because maybe his visuals get Pisces rising. I know his visuals get Pisces rising. He's very ethereal. But again, I don't want to just, you know, be like, oh, maybe these two or maybe these three rising signs work. I kind of wanted to really take in some of the data that we have or that we know that is available to us and really apply it to the chart and kind of work backwards and see what rising sign does really call to him based off of the important events that have happened in his life. So that is the chart that I'm bringing and presenting to you right now. And it's this chart. Obviously, he was born September 15, 2000. The time that I'm using is 5:14 p.m. Sydney, Australia, ascendant 4 degrees of Pisces. Now, I don't want to get too technical, but like I said, there were important dates that I used to kind of get here. And I'll be adding more to it as we go on. But with a Pisces rising chart, it kind of makes sense because Felix doesn't push like his presence. It's not like a Leo rising would be, like he absorbs his attention instead of like demanding it. Um, and I feel like there's this sense that he's like emotionally open to and very comforting and very readable as a person, but not in the oversharing, type of way, right? And what happens when the front-facing part of someone's chart is built around permea permeability rather than like assertion, it's going to show up in that way of almost like lured into his presence, right? But not overbearing or too out there or too loud, if that makes sense, right? Now, the important thing to consider here is that if we have, right, a accurate, semi-accurate chart, this would put his sun in the seventh house and obviously in Virgo, in the sign of Virgo. So what this does is that it opposes that first house of like his image, right? And puts the sun in the seventh house of relationships, um, which this is where collaborations will fall as well. But it does tell you about how he functions internally, right? So like with it being in the seventh house and in Virgo, it kind of has this disciplined, effort-driven, very detail-oriented Virgo. Um, and very aware of his role in relations to others. That's what a seventh house sun has. Um, while externally, right, the opposite house, which is Pisces, he comes across as this very like gentle, intuitive person. And I feel like that balance is one of the main reason he doesn't burn through his like image or overexposes himself, if that makes sense. Now, when you start layering the aspects onto the sun, it kind of gets even clearer because with the Virgo sun trining this Saturn at 0 degrees, I understand it's not like super exact, but it does, I do like a up to like 10-degree orb sometimes, especially for like outer planets like Saturn. But it does trine the Saturn in Gemini, which kind of adds a level of very like seriousness to him and responsibility and like self-regulation that might not be obvious to people at first glance, but it is there, like in how carefully he like handles pressure, and how consistent he is over time. And he's not the type of idol that like spirals publicly, right? He is very, well, like he handles the pressure of like being an idol very well, I feel like, especially for the industry that he is in. But that's kind of one of the things that I felt like adds to his demeanor. Because he does have that Saturnian play with in the way that he like presents himself. And I feel like that's one of the things that brands are very much attracted to. And I'll kind of dig more a little bit into what other placements kind of add to that. But he does have the moon in Aries in the second house. And obviously, emotionally, this moon in Aries is doing a lot of quiet work here. Because this is someone whose emotional energy is very fast, reactive, and even playful at times, but it is tied to the second house of self-worth and value rather than his own identity, which is why you can kind of see that sometimes his like actual playfulness um comes out in certain environments, not always, right? And in the environments that it does come out, that moon in Aries does project out, is when he like feels secure, supported, sorry, and even comfortable. So We can see that around the members, people that he really trusts, but it's not usually his default mode, if that makes sense. And of course, like I said, it that moon is doing a lot of quiet work, but it's also doing a lot of heavy lifting. So right now it's only showing me the opposition with Mercury, but it is still very loosely opposing Venus as well. Has a trine to Pluto, a sextile to Jupiter and Gemini. But I do want to talk more about it being kind of opposed, that Mercury and Venus and Libra, which kind of creates this constant like internal balancing act between how he feels, which is the moon, and how he expresses it, which is Mercury. And I feel like it's one of the reasons that he comes across like very emotionally like considerate and sometimes even cautious on how like what words he uses and stuff like that, because there's this awareness of his feelings that there's an understanding that his feelings are not just like in isolation. Like it will affect the people around him, the people watching. And so that moon, I mean, it's doing heavy lifting there because it's like hyper aware. Um, and at the same time, obviously, sextiling Jupiter and Gemini and trining Pluto in Sagittarius. There's a huge like understanding of his emotional depth and presence because Jupiter does kind of bring this warmth and curiosity and emotional reach to this Mercury, but also to the moon, especially in the way that they're communicating the moon and Mercury. Jupiter just kind of adds that like comfort, warmth layer, that sunshine aura that he gives, right? Um, but this emotional reach, right? While Pluto, which is trining, kind of adds this intensity and gravity. Um, and that sense of that when he is present, he's really present. He's like really locked in, even if he's like not saying too much, like you can definitely feel him, if that makes a sense. I know you guys would know. I know you guys, I know, God, I know you guys know because again, he is like considered like the sunshine of the group, and his aura is just very, infectious and magnetic. And so it's um, that Pluto Jupiter in communication with that moon, right? And then of course that the moon reflects the sun's light, so it does kind of, if you're getting where I'm getting at, really show how his sunshine personality comes about. But talking a little bit more about Mercury and Venus and Libra, right? This is where I feel like we have a lot of those observable traits as well. And especially from brands that appeal that he has to them. Because Mercury and Venus are both in Libra, loosely conjunct, which means loosely to connected together, which already kind of gives you like or tells you that Felix thinks, speaks, and kind of relates in a deeply tied way to making sure that there's harmony, balance, and like emotional awareness um in his communication style. And I feel like that's one of the reasons why he is so like appealing to brands. He just has this way of the way that he communicates just really stands out. And I feel like it's because Mercury is kind of getting like all these aspects, all this communication or like relationship between all these planets. It's like they're they're kind of giving this extra boost to that Mercury placement um for that Mercury in Libra. And of course, like it trines Jupiter in Gemini, like almost exact, off by 1 degree. And really, I feel like with this communication that Mercury and Libra and Jupiter and Gemini have in this trine is also why his voice it travels so far. Um, we're not just talking about the literal sense here, but emotionally and culturally, we know the Felix effect. Because this aspect does really give someone the ability to communicate in a way that feels very expansive, inclusive, and just easy to just receive. So I feel like it's a big reason why people across different like cultural and languages background kind of just gravitate to him naturally. Which is why I feel like also brands gravitate to him very naturally. And then we have also Mercury trining Uranus in Aquarius right here. Uranus in Aquarius retrograde, and obviously the sextile to Pluto. But honestly, this combination is kind of one of the strongest explanation as to why his voice feels very unique and powerful, because Uranus kind of brings that like originality and that like slightly unexpected edge, while Pluto adds like strength to it and depth to it. Um, this intensity to how his voice is projected. So when Felix speaks or performs, it carries a lot with it. And of course, that's why they give him iconic lines, because his voice just has that power, right? And because Mercury is in Libra, none of that intensity comes across aggressive. So remember, Libra is all about harmony, balance, and so that you have this like buffer that is Libra, so it comes a little bit more controlled, balance, and relational. So I feel like it's why his voice can be dominant without like being too much. I'll leave that there. Um, and then of course we do have Venus and Libra, which again is just adding that to that Mercury energy. So it's doing something very similar to it, especially with it trining also Uranus in Aquarius and the sextile to Pluto in Sag, because this is someone who senses like the aesthetics, and relational energy is both like quietly magnetic but also very refined. Like I said, that Libra buffer. That's why it doesn't look like he's trying to sell you flashiness, right? Sell you luxury, or fit into a specific type of fashion. He always looks so good. Um, like it looks like that style belongs to him, or like he belongs there, right? So that Venus has a loose like opposition to also the moon in Aries, which kind of also explains that constant push and pull between that masculinity, like toughness, and that softness, that he just manages to kind of switch into, like decide when to pull in, or to project that masculinity, and when to be able to project that femininity, um which I feel like is very much iconic to him. So again, it's just like this gentle presence really paired with like boldness, you know, and uh confidence that Aries moon is going to have. But again, that Libra energy really kind of softens that Aries fire, and so it doesn't come out or project in a way that's like, I'm here. It does it very, very subtle. And it kind of creates this contrast, which is, again, I feel like what is very incredibly compelling just visually. and musically and emotionally from him. Like it's really what makes Felix stand out as an individual. And I feel like one of the things that also brands really are like, whoa, you know? Um, Now I do want to talk about his Mars in the sixth house in Leo. And with Mars being here in the sixth house, what tells me is that a lot about how Felix works, because this is someone who puts like his creative energy into daily effort and performance. It's not about the ego so much in here. In the sixth house, it's more discipline in a way, I feel like, because it does have a square to Saturn. So it does create some sort of discipline and endurance and an ability to kind of keep things sort of even though he's in a very demanding industry. And you can see how steady his career has been rather than like explosive and unsustainable because having sixth house Leo, like a sixth house that's ruled by the sun, there is a way of like feeling very burnt out because it is a house of service, and daily like routine. So there is an element where a lot of like that, um, fuel and energy for him can come from being of service to others, right? And that can really burn somebody out. Um, as a Pisces rising myself, like I having Leo sixth house, you can it's very easy to like burn yourself out. But because it does have a square to Saturn, this could have been like completely like what you call it, the opposite way, right? It could have been the other way where it's like I have no structure, nothing. But there is a way of sometimes even difficult aspects like a square, um, where there's this like tension of, especially with Mars and Saturn, Mars wants to go, 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 and Saturn wants to stop you. So this could have gone the other way, right? Of the spectrum of like there's no way of balancing things. Leo Mars can just decide to be chaotic, and Saturn doesn't know when to stop or is trying to stop impulsively because it is in Gemini, not knowing where to um or be too specific, right? But there is a way of sometimes difficult aspects to still help you in the good way, if that makes sense. And you can see this with his chart, like there's a level of discipline and endurance here and the ability to keep going even when things are demanding. And you can see that in how, again, how steady his career has been, not being something like unsustainable, if that makes sense. But another thing with Saturn is that it's very close to Jupiter. It is 10 degrees away, but it's still relatively close in my opinion because they're both in the fourth house. So, it does show about that his life has been shaped by communication and learning how to adapt, especially early on, with moving environments, right? He was born in Sydney, but he moved to Korea, so having to move between environments, between cultures, and while Jupiter does expand experience, Saturn does add a sense of like responsibility around words, especially because it is in Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury. Um, but also how that messaging comes across, which is why Felix tends to be very thoughtful and I feel like very measurable, uh, in the sense of like how he speaks in public. Um, even though right behind the scenes or when he is with the members, um, can switch to very playful type of communication. But I still do want to talk about Pluto and Chiron in the 10th house again because it's also in a very visible house in the 10th house. And so one of the things that is really important to understand here is I feel like Pluto and Chiron being in the 10th house, his presence carries a sense of authority without arrogance. Because this is someone whose public role really involves around depth, transformation, and meaning, not just when he's performing. And because again, this Pluto does and this moon trine, that moon in Aries, like it gives this emotional access to that. It kind of taps into that power without it becoming too much or overwhelming, right? But it's with a trine, it kind of alleviates a little bit, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Um, but yes, the moon kind of just helps regulate that in a way. But one thing that I did want to bring to you guys, because I am still in the process of learning more about fixed stars, but I love fixed stars. And I was curious to see what this chart looked like if I were to project or identify the fixed stars in his chart to kind of see like if the rectification of his chart was kind of holding up. And the stars that did come up kind of show that kind of prominence and just reputation that somebody carries over time. And obviously, when I pull for this specific chart, it just kind of reinforced everything that I was seeing, and that we know of Felix. And there is like a lot of strong signatures tied to visibility, recognition, leadership, and being seen rather than chasing to be seen, right? So wanna kind of just including the stars associated with prominence and enduring recognition, like Regulus, which was connected to his Mars, and also if you know what I'm talking about, his heliacal rising star. Um, but as well, he also had stars tied to carrying influence and being noticed at the peak of one's career. And obviously, it just, again, not to go deep into it because I'm still a newbie when it comes to it, but it does show like why everything kind of just matches this ascendant, right? Breaking down this chart from the Pisces rising, as far as what we know of Felix, public image and trajectory. But another layer that I kind of wanted to bring up was the December 4 announcement of Navarre with Spotify, which, they revealed that Felix is like the face of the partnership. And of course, I didn't like have a specific time for when that was announced. I tried to find it, but I couldn't get an exact time. But just slapping on a noon chart, right? Right here, inside chart is Felix's rectified birth chart that I have for him, and then outside is the transits. Um, Even here you can kind of see that like the Pisces and early Aquarius placements are like being activated. Those houses are being activated, which directly lits up that rising degree that we're working with, which is the 4 degrees. And it does obviously with the North Node also um just kind of lightening up that first house topics, right? We are seeing that he is the face of these brands, that he as the forefront of all of these like brand deals and stuff like that. And obviously in opposition to his South Node in Virgo in the seventh house. So a lot about, obviously it's not showing up here, but if you know the North Node is here, then you know the South Node is here. A lot of it being, you know, activated between seventh house and first house about himself, but also about partnerships and collaboration, which is the seventh house as well. And yeah, there's just like a sense of like it lit up, right? Um, and one thing that I did want to check, let me see, he just had a birthday. So he is, if I'm not mistaken, 21, no, 23, 24. Yes, as he just turned 25. So yeah, so he was going through a first house perfection year. So if you're not aware with perfection years, what we do is like every house will like highlight is prominent for each year of your life. So when you're born, it's the first house. When you turn one is the second house. And so then you take the planetary ruler of the sign. So in this case, um, for when he was one, right, it would have been Mars. Um, before his birthday in 2025, right, September, um, between September 15 of 2024 to September 15 of 2025, his chart ruler would have been in, bleh, Jupiter, right? Because I go by traditional astrology. Um, so his planetary time lord or like head honcho CEO of the year in his chart for when he was 24 would have been Jupiter because Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter right now has been in Cancer, which is right here, which you see. And obviously, when Jupiter is in Cancer, it's exalted. We love that. Sometimes it can be excessive, but it is does bring some harmony and some like nice warmth feelings. But that also can represent just expansion of his image, right? And so because it was the ruler of his first house, it kind of makes sense that he's just like everywhere, that his face is like everywhere. And not only has that been the case, but now he's moving into a second year, perfection year, which would have happened September 15 of 2025 when he turned 25. He's now in a second house year. So now to keep in mind, right, is how Mars is in the sky or like what it's doing in the sky. So Mars is in Sag in the 10th house. So the second house, it is self-value and worth, but it's also kind of how you make money sometimes, like where the money is coming from. And as you can tell, Mars is in the 10th house, so a lot about his public image. Um, so we are seeing a lot of like patterns or indicators of, not only his image, because also the North Node is transiting his first house, which, you know, the nodes are wherever the nodes are, there is some powerful energy going on there because we tend to have eclipses there for like 18 months. And so again, it still ties into his first house because it's being activated by these planets there. But now that he's moved on to a second house year, we are seeing that, that recognition and his worth, but also money and how it relates to his public image. So we can definitely see those topic, how that transition went from first house to second house. But um that is also an element that just kind of adds to confirmation, right? To this chart. Um so yeah, this is kind of like where I landed with Felix, really. And honestly, it just obviously I will do more observations as time goes, but this chart just keeps behaving in a way that just confirms that he is a Pisces rising. Of course, 4 degrees might be off. I might be off in degree because, of course, I don't have his exact birth time. But for sure, in my heart and in the way that I've been trying to rectify this chart, I've come to the early degrees of Pisces is what I'm kind of baselining this reading at. But again, I just kind of wanted to bring you guys something a little bit more in depth. I'm not, if I can do a little bit of extra work to kind of give you a little bit more of a confident confirmation and information based off of like a time chart, then I will. Um, and I wanted to be able to provide you guys a little bit more layers to just the sun in Virgo means this, moon in Aries mean this. I kind of wanted to not only personally understand what is so like, oh my God, Felix is like the collector of brands right now. Like that doesn't naturally happen. He has to have some energetic signature here that explains it, right? So I kind of wanted to bring this reading or like break down this reading with that angle as well. But um I do thank you so much for being here. I know I talk a lot. But I do read through all your comments, through all your requests of groups and idols. I see the names that come up more than once. I just don't always have the time to knock every single one of those requests right now. Especially when it comes to like time charts or like rectifying. Like if I don't have a birth time, it's gonna take me a minute to sit down with the chart and be like, okay, let's get to work. Um, because again, I just want to be able to provide you guys a little bit more layer. Um, again, if you the more you get to know me through this series, um I like to go deep into the levels of astrology. And of course, if I feel like I don't understand something or a specific signature, I'm going to try and do my research on it. I am a student of astrology forever. Um I don't know everything, and I always like to kind of be like, oh, I don't know what this signature might express like. Let me see what other astrologers have, concluded in regards to these two energy or this signature and planet combinations. And so I try to give you something a little bit more than just surface level astrology. That's all I'm trying to say. But going into next year, I do want to prioritize Patreon members first. So I'm taking into consideration maybe like having a priority request form over there. That way I have a better idea of like who wants what. Um and it just kind of gives me a space to actually do that extra work, right, and not cut corners with these readings. So if you've been asking for a specific person or chart that you want to see get done, like at this level of depth, um, then that will be what I might be focusing on come 2026. But either way, I do really appreciate your engagement here, because it again, it does help me understand what people are actually curious about. And if you are somebody who like agrees with me or disagrees with me, I mean, I would like to um see where you see the astrology at. Again, like I said, I'm a student of astrology forever, because there's just so much out there, and the I'm ranting right now, but like um with the way that, modern life, like obviously back then we have significations of what happened back then, but like how does that apply to modern day, right? So there's a way of trying to learn how to apply it to today's day and age, but again, what I'm trying to say is, um, if you know something or if you want to share something that I might have not gotten right in your opinion, then feel free to share that below. But also a little bit more of housekeeping. I am trying to work on my own channel, which I think it's gonna be added to a collaborative post. So if you see like a blonde chick right next to the Fangirls React logo, that's my personal YouTube, which I'm trying to grow in 2026, where I want to talk more about cultural analysis via the lens of astrology, and other topics that are non-K-pop astrology. So if you do have any ideas that or topics that you would like for me to cover that don't require K-pop astrology, because this is the segment for Fangirls React channel, then feel free to still comment them. Because I do kind of want to bring more astrology content to you guys that necessarily doesn't speak to K-pop. And I love doing cultural analysis as well. But that is the goal for 2026. But again, as always, thank you so much for hanging out with me, for listening me yap and try to break down Felix's chart. Just tell me, what were your thoughts on this rectified chart? Do you think we're close? Do you think he's a Pisces rising? Whether it lines up with his, like, experience, or like life experiences or life events. God. Um, and is there anything particularly that stood out to you that I said in regards to how I landed here? And make sure to comment. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, because it generally does help this channel so, so much. And again, thank you guys so much for your love and support. I will be catching you guys on either a reaction video or another K-pop astrology breakdown. So toodles. I will catch you guys on the flippity flip. Bye.